Hi, I'm here to talk to you about our first topic for the course, Creativity in the Brain. And I have to admit that after rereading the articles, this is pretty heavy-duty material, but I wanted you to be able to see that there are scientists who are really interested in finding out if there's evidence for creativity to be housed at some place in the brain or related to brain functions. This line of thinking comes from the modernist view that everything about behavior is able to be measured and quantified. Also would be related to a rationalist perspective. If we think about what Paisley wrote in his paper, Paisley states that creativity is the sudden, involuntary, and inexplicable outpouring of innovative ideas and actions, and can be related to a sacred instance, a spirit or a muse, or the unconscious mind. Rationalists say that a form of calculation or deliberate problem solving is what's happening with creativity. And so we have to be able to juxtapose the idea that creativity is a sudden illumination with the idea that it's related to something more contrived or daily strenuous efforts. Creativity is also described as a transforming of a rule-bound conceptual space, or coming upon a novel or surprising result. Creativity is not limited to making art, but must simply have some real positive value. Creative actions are actions that are intended to and have the potential to satisfy human needs, from Paisley's perspective. Now, if we look at the work of Heilman is interested in imagination and visual imagery and what happens in the brain with those processes. Heilman discusses images as useful to artists in that they're visualized and transformed to help artists and creative people generate solutions to problems and to change their work. And this is achieved via the use of imagination. Imagination and imagery help with memory, even with rote memory tasks, particularly if the person who's trying to remember something can make some kind of visual image. And so an example might be the person who makes a visual image of a map in order to think about planning a trip or driving across town. Creative people are said to use images to perform virtual experiments. And so reading this, I think about my process as a photographer and think that it's true that I, in a sense, perform visual experiments when I have a subject that I want to photograph and I'm trying to make a decision about what image I can create that will be engaging. And so I may consider focusing close up or making the image from a more distant perspective, or moving around what I'm photographing, focusing the lens upward or downward, or maybe using a filter that distorts or changes the image in some way. So in that sense, I am performing a series of experiments, and usually in that process come up with an image that's aesthetically interesting to me. It's been found that perception and imagery use the same pathways in the brain, and so that a person who's using imagery demonstrates a deficit in perceptual abilities at that same moment. There's also anatomical support for that idea, and that the same structures used for visual perception are active when an individual participates in visual imagery. So if visual perception of real objects is competing with imagined images, we get a hint about what kinds of practices will be helpful for us if we're using active imagination, for example, in an attempt to uncover creative inspiration. In that sense, we want to close ourselves off from direct perception of the real world, so that those structures can be used for imagination related to creating. The author also describes studies of persons with brain dysfunction that suggest the complex nature of processes related to visual imagery. So, for example, Freud described patients who had no problems with vision or visual acuity but could not recognize objects. And this suggests the complex interaction of the eye as an organ and higher level cortical structures that receive input from the eye and then make what's being observed meaningful. And so this makes me think of the work of some photographers who are blind or have a diagnosis of being blind and yet are able to make photographic images. And so these abilities have been attributed to intuition or imagination, but it's possible that somehow visual information is being perceived but not recognized by the artist per se. So if you look at some of the images of their work, you see that there are aspects of composition and aesthetics that are happening with them that would not seemingly be possible if a person was completely blind. However, it is possible that the artists are using other sensory information like sounds or sensory perception of the sun on their body or the wind in order to make decisions about what kind of images that they're going to make. Seeing something with the mind's eye is called imagery or hallucination, depending on the situation. These two are not the same. Hallucination is a false perceptual experience in the absence of sensory stimuli, and so is imagery, but the difference is that imagery is described as intentional, and that's a distinction that Jung has made as well. The author states that it's unusual for persons who have hallucinations to use them intentionally, but I beg to differ about this, particularly in the community of outsider or self-taught artists who we will talk about a little bit later in the course, who are often persons who are said to have hallucinations related to psychiatric diagnoses, but are able to use what happens in these visions, as individuals describe them, as inspiration for their creative work. It's possible also for many different kinds of sensory stimuli to evoke imagery, thinking about it in the way that we are considering inspiration or using imagination creatively. So it's possible to evoke images while reading or listening to a story or listening to music. Seeing objects may also evoke creative language representations, or for musicians, lyrics or musical scores may also be imagined. I've noticed that viewing images for me that I feel drawn to may eventually influence my photographic work, even though I'm not, in a sense, trying to copy another artist's work. Somehow the imagery is getting in and is being incubated and then has an effect that for me is positive on my work. According to Dietrich and Kanzo, creativity is what makes us human. It's a process related to our being able to change thinking patterns and make something new. Creativity has only been studied by scientists in the last 50 years, and these authors state that scientists have been challenged to develop methods that are appropriate to study creativity. And so they've used surveys, case studies, personality inventories, but less often have used actual planned laboratory studies. Psychologists have related creativity to divergent thinking, or the ability to generate multiple solutions to an open-ended question. This makes sense. It seems like this is what we do as artists. For example, if someone is writing fiction, a protagonist may be presented with a problem and the story can move in many different directions. As a photographer, I know, as I mentioned, that I can shoot an image from different perspectives to find the solution to the, quote, problem of what will be aesthetically pleasing for me. scientists have created varied tests and lab protocols to try to study divergent thinking. But the divergent thinking hypothesis has also been criticized. Creative thinking can also be convergent. For example, Edison's methods for solving scientific problems, and also Bach's way of composing. For a craftsperson, I think of convergent thinking like what the process of Weaver uses, bringing many different textures and materials of fiber together to create a single object. Creative work has been said to have 4 stages: preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. So in the process we get inspiration from viewing images, listening to music, or dreaming. And then there's a period of incubation within ourselves when this material that's been taken in is undergoing perhaps an alchemical transformation, but it's not yet expressed. And then illumination, or however we want to describe the process of the creative work coming forward. And then verification, the realization and recognition that what is created is a work of art, and that it may continue to change. These authors looked at studies that used EEG, which is a measure of brain activity, to try to have a sense of where these processes were taking place or occurring in the brain. And in general, their findings were that there's not a certain region of the brain that's related to creativity. So we often hear about creativity and artistic ability being related to the right brain, but there are not findings that support that all activity is happening there. There's not a particular region that's related to divergent thinking, and the findings in these studies have not been very consistent, but the studies suggest that many areas of the brain are used for divergent thinking, and that those areas are working together. The prefrontal cortex seems to be involved, but it's not clear that it's active for creative work or deactivated for creative work, so there's just not much support for that kind of problem solving being related to a particular part of the brain. Regarding insight, there are variable findings, and the authors say that possibly these problems are related to the scientists using different kinds of models and different kinds of paradigms to study insight. But again, the conclusions looking at several studies is that creativity is not located in one part of the brain, or the right brain, and that idea is too simplistic. And again, as well, the idea of needing to be in a different state of more focus or less arousal for creative work to occur, there's just not evidence that that's true. What I think the findings of all of the studies that the authors consider taken together is that creativity is a complex process, and that it involves many areas of the brain working together to solve problems, if you're thinking from a rationalist point of view, or to be in a place of imagination from which those creative experiences are able to come forward. We'll talk a little bit more about some other ideas about creativity, other perspectives, in the next part of this lecture.